You know what, Steve, I can't print here, I can only print it this one. Okay.
Great. We're going to call the meeting to order tonight, 6:10 p.m. Need a motion to approve the agenda for tonight.
Motion to approve the agenda. Sorry.
All in favor? Aye. And the agenda has been approved for this evening. Our first order of business is to select a chairperson, a vice chairperson, and a recording secretary for our multi-board meetings. So we'll take nominations at this point for chairperson.
This is interesting.
Can I ask a question? When we originally formed the multi-board meeting, there were a number of other purposes besides the school budget. Is this group gonna focus on other things besides the school budget? Or are we here to just talk about the school budget? Because if we're here to just talk about the school budget, we don't need to have the structure of a multi-board like committee. We can just have joint meetings. Does that
Well,
make
I don't
sense?
know that, I mean, I think that it made sense in the past to have those multi-board meetings that went beyond budget conversations. I think having collaborative discussions on a variety of topics is productive for all of us. So I envisioned this being more than just budget, but with a focus on budget to begin with, only because of the situation.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And I think there's an opportunity to get community comments, and I think you need a chairperson for that kind of thing. It's kind of confusing to have it also with other.
I'm just asking because originally it seems like many of the focuses were on the school budget. If it was just that, there's an easier way to handle it. But if we're going to focus on more than the school budget, we're going to focus on broader conversations by all means.
Well, I mean, even if you're having just conversations on the budget, there really should be one person identified as chair, and it doesn't necessarily mean it would be someone from the school committee or from, you know, I think structurally it's easier to, even if we are just talking about the budget, to just call it a multi-board meeting that's chaired by someone individually from.
Yeah.
Just
Procedurally, that makes more sense, but I also think that part of, I think the mission that I envisioned for this group was sort of combating that school district versus town attitude. And the way to do that is to kind of bring us together on larger discussions than just the budget. So to me, it makes sense.
I think in order to have a budget discussion, that precludes you to talk about what the purpose of that money is, and then you're in a whole discussion about where the priorities are and what you can spend. So I think you're going to go beyond that no matter what.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Real said earlier, when the first multi-board was put together some years ago, the basic idea of it, I thought, was to see where we could have combined efficiencies. And that effort was not as successful as it had been anticipated. Now, I see this meeting now as something where we're going to, representatives from the town are going to sit with the school committee. And I see it happening maybe 3 times at the most. It's still the school committee's budget. So the town can say, oh, we want this or we want that. It's still the school committee's budget. So I've had an earlier discussion today with Mr. DeZetta, and I can't personally see the need for chairman and vice chairman, and because I see this as basically interacting with the committee and, more importantly, the school budget committee. And they should be meeting on a regular basis. So it just seems to me like we're making a lot more out of this than we have to.
Then question back then, so then from a procedural standpoint, if and when our agendas open up to allow for community comment, how has that worked in the past? How is that, it's just to me, and, you know, my history with the school committee is not long, but that piece can feel a little chaotic if there's not at least one person who's,
In
I
multi-board
identified
meetings in
some-
the past,
yeah,
I don't believe we opened community comments.
okay,
Because the purpose of the multi-board meeting was to get the boards to talk together
okay,
about various different challenges or issues or the ability to collaborate more. And I'm only brought it up from the standpoint of if there are areas and items to focus on, well, then we should structure it that way. I just didn't know what else was on the agenda besides the school budget.
Excuse me if I may.
Go ahead.
I think there's two different things. For the purposes of these meetings, I don't think there's any harm in having a chairman. The presentation of the school budget is still going to be the school committee, kind of echoing what Mr. Flaherty said. The budget is the school committee's budget. So if I'm hoping this year is going to be nice and smooth and we're not going to have any bumps in the road and no exorbitant asks from our taxpayers. But either way, that presentation will be the leadership of the school and the school committee. So for the purposes of what we're meeting and the, again, different topics that we may or may not want to cross into, you know, I have no problem appointing a chairman. And to go one step further, I would make a nomination of Mark Reel as chairman. Looking out for you.
Yeah, great.
Madam Chairman? Maureen Dwell,
yes.
it was my understanding that we were going to have this multi-board meeting to bring everybody together to collaborate on the entire budget, meaning the school and the town budget. I think that we all want to work together to provide what the school needs and what the town needs are. But I think we all need to be in sync with everything that we put forward to town meeting. That was my impression of this meeting.
So I second that nomination.
There's
You're
a
also
second.
kind.
Okay, then, all in favor?
Aye.
Pat?
with all due respect, does he want to do it?
I will do it. I just asked him that. I will do it.
Then,
But I remember, I'm done in May, so someone's got to take up the reins after that.
gotta get our work done quickly then, is what you're saying. Okay. By voice vote, it passes, and Mark Reel is the chairperson of our multi-board.
Can I just make a comment? We might want to get an eye out of Maureen and Lonnie since they remote, and this is kind of a weird makeup. I don't even know how to even handle that, but
We actually need a roll call.
Yeah.
We need a roll call.
it's not, you do because you have two members, there, but at the same time, it's not a actual committee that's going. It's kind of a quasi, so I'm just making a comment.
Right.
Better to err on the side of caution, so might as well do a roll call vote then on the nomination for Mark as the chairperson of our multi-board meeting. Starting with Carrie Lawrence, aye.
Vicki Ludwigson, aye.
Eric Brown, aye.
Sean Nicholson, aye.
Bill Desotter, aye.
Mike Morale, aye.
Mark Reel, aye.
Stephen Metellian, aye.
Paul Flaherty abstained.
Maureen Dwinell abstain.
Lonnie.
Lonnie.
Tenio, aye.
By roll call vote, motion passes. Mark Reel is the chairperson of our multi-board meeting. So next we would need nominations for vice chairperson and recording secretary.
Madam Chair, with all due respect, it's now his meeting.
Yep.
Great. Nominations for vice chairperson. Stephen. I'm not going to nominate as chairperson. Someone wants to
Oh, I
nominate.
nominate Sean Nicholson.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's
I would second that nomination.
Okay, okay.
Okay, there's been a nomination for Sean Nicholson as vice chair and a second. Need a roll call vote. Again, Mark Real, aye.
Stephen Mattelli, aye.
Paul Flaherty abstained.
Mike Morale, aye.
All those that are aye.
Sean Nicholson, aye.
Kirk Brown, aye.
Mary Lawrence, aye.
Vicky Ludwigson, aye.
Maureen Dwight, aye.
Tenio, aye.
Okay, the motion for nominating Sean Nicholson as vice chair is passed. Congratulations, Sean. Now we'll accept nominations for recording secretary.
Dominic Kelly.
Second,
Second.
motion to nominate Kelly Gallerith as recording secretary. There's been a second. All in favor? Aye.
Morale, aye.
Those that are aye.
Nicholson, aye.
Kirk Brown, aye.
Mary Lawrence, aye.
Vicky Ludwigson, aye.
Paul Flaherty, aye.
Stephen Mattelli, aye.
Maureen Dwinell, aye.
Tenio, aye.
Okay, motion passes. Move on to new business. Establish goals and meeting schedule for the multi-board. How would you like to individually go around and discuss what your individual goals are, or do we want to broadly discuss? I mean, personally, I think that the goal initially is to discuss the budget process and make sure that we're all on the same page going into that process earlier than we may normally go into that process. So that's my personal first and foremost goal here.
I would not disagree with you, Mike.
I would agree with that basic premise and basic timeline, I guess with the caveat that it seems to me like we're already a little behind. I know we're fresh into, from a budgetary standpoint, school year standpoint, we're kind of fresh into FY '22, but we start in December, the second half of December, really talking about building our budget. So assuming we can get a really good idea where the school system or the school committee is with respect to the budget by January, that puts the town in, pretty comfortable position. But when March, April rolls around, we're kind of just getting that certification and now realizing that we're facing override questions. I feel like that's too late. So I feel like one of the things that would be important is identify problems early. And let's get that out there in January, not March. Actually, I take that back. December, not March.
So if I could, so we do have a couple of items on this agenda that talk about the budget development process for both towns and school district together. So getting the timing right is probably a very important thing. And I hope we've covered that in the agenda. But just to iterate what you said about goals, I think it's really important to have the schedule and the process mapped out at this meeting, which I think is the intent of the agenda. But I also want to bring up that my objectives for having the team together, the two towns and the school, is to relate the objectives of the school as well, because I think that's an important consideration with respect to allocating budget. So, and I think that's one of the problems that we've had in the past, that we've only talked about budget, irrespective of any type of activity that's going on in the school or what the problems that the school is facing are. So when that conversation is disjoint, and I think we get a lot of disinformation out there that doesn't lead to a very knowledgeable conclusion about what we're trying to do with the money that's given to the school district.
So in terms of the meeting schedule, how do we think we want to set a time cadence for this? We want to have it set to be every other week, or is it a monthly thing, or what are we thinking for that?
So I think they're really, from a school budget perspective, I think there are two dates. I think we need to have a joint meeting in mid-January, where we can share with you the initial estimates and where we are with initial early discussions. Because normally our budget process, we're having budgetary numbers and we're starting to work through those numbers by mid to the end of December. And then we're also getting state revenue numbers and all those kinds of things that don't really come until the early part of January or even the end of January.
Fourth Wednesday in January.
Fourth Wednesday in January, so. But, so I mean, if we have at least the mid-January piece, you can start to get a perspective there, but then like we did last year, have a joint meeting as well towards the end of February, before we have any public meeting, so that we can go through the details and where we are, what's up with the revenue side, and all those kinds of things. Those are at least two meetings dates that I think make sense from the school budgetary perspective. I don't know where it is from the standpoint of the towns and understanding the revenue picture, the towns and things like that.
Well, I think that, in this given situation, it may be, if possible, best to start earlier, even though the revenue side is a little bit of a question mark until January. The expense side, I think, could be a little, the conversation could start a little sooner, right? Because those numbers are a little more solid and well-known. Maybe healthcare is not quite known yet by December, because I know you mentioned December would be a good time to have some information. But it would be nice to, I know from the Mendon's perspective, our budget process is beginning. People are starting to put numbers in.
Yep.
So I think we can have conversation without the revenue side earlier.
So we normally, in a budget committee perspective, have that initial conversation about mid to the end of December. So part of that is a question of who will be the Mendon representative, because I think over the last few years, that position in many respects has gone, I'll call it absent. I think we've been told it was Heather in the past, but she didn't really show up and things like that. So, and I know Mr. Flaherty comes to our meetings and I off with Sean, not the other Sean, FinCom. So I think that would be one of the initial pieces. I mean, if you want, we need to have a bigger audience at that initial piece. Don't always go there, but I mean, from a budget subcommittee perspective, we need an initial point to see numbers and things like that. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jay and Warren, but that's really about the time that we get really first expense numbers. Or do you think we'll have them earlier?
I think we're starting our process in the next couple of weeks, where we typically don't get numbers back from the principals till like Thanksgiving or the first week of December. So hopefully by the beginning of December, we'll have at least some kind of a handle on some of the things we're looking at on the expense side. The revenue side is purely estimates until the fourth Wednesday in January when the state comes out. Because as we saw last year, minimum local contribution can totally skew what happens on a town level, like we did last year, right, Paul? So until we get those, it's really hard to tell where everything's going to fall out. It's those two numbers, the minimum contributions are really critical. I mean, state aid, we already know where state aid is going to be. It's going to be the minimum, $20 or $30 a student. But as far as Chapter 70, that is. But the minimum is something we don't get. But the expense side, we should hopefully have it sooner. I'm hoping.
And I can add to that, and I don't know, in the agenda it falls a little bit later, but I'm happy to speak to it at any point to share our timeline. We've actually moved up our timeline in our budget process, and we've also added in other details into the communicating our budget and departmental presentations. So part of our process at all of our school committee meetings, starting in about a month or so, we'll have updates to really kind of tell the story of where we're at and what our needs are. And we are starting earlier. We're still impacted by the state information, but from an internal level, we're starting earlier and we'll have more details than we have in the past.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
I don't want to speak for Mr. Brindisi, but the town of Upton has had a budget calendar in place for, quite a while now. And in years past, under Mr. Brindisi, we've always pretty much had a first pass budget in place by the last week in January. Now, there's things that change here and there, but the town manager's portion of the budget is generally in place, like I say, by the last week in January. I don't know if Derek wants to comment on that or not, but
Yeah, if I can have the floor for a few minutes, Mr. Chair. So as Mr. Flaherty pointed out, we start our budget process right after town meeting. So I send out my budget guidance to the boards and the elected boards and committees and the departments that report under the Board of Selectmen right after town meeting. They are required to submit to me their budget proposals by the third week of December. I spend the next couple of weeks thereafter meeting with them individually, much like you do with your principals and other department staff. And then, as Mr. Flaherty pointed out, we put together a budget recommendation, usually somewhere around the third week to fourth week of January. Now, that is still a really tight timeline when you think about just the process the schools have to go through, where you have to certify your budget somewhere, I think, second or third week of March, I believe. So it doesn't give us a lot of time if there's a shift in movement with the school's budget for the towns to adjust, given that timeline. Honestly, I really think that what would go a long way is if Kim and myself and Maureen started conversations first and build our budgets parallel with one another, so that we are all confident that the numbers that we're submitting are going to be the most accurate in terms of projected expenses prior to it going public. If you look at what happened last time, we all thought we were on the same page, and then everything went sideways thereafter. And I think it was, as Jay pointed out, maybe because of the minimum local contribution. So for me, it's really about engaging the school administration, engaging the Mendon administration before anything goes live. And I see this group in front of me more as a clearinghouse to help resolve issues that can't be resolved between the three different administrations.
Thank you.
Might I ask Jay, when, again, the big driving number is that minimum local contribution. When will that be available? Do you have any idea?
Fourth Wednesday in January, when the governor releases his budget. It will change as it works its way through the House, but typically that number is pretty rock
That
solid.
number is still based on property values and income and, towns, what they determine as the town's ability to pay.
Municipal growth factor.
So that isn't going to change that much.
Well,
Again, dealing with a school budget and a town budget, you're dealing with uncertainties. We got to know for town meeting in May, or even before that, when the school has a budget hearing in 15th of March somewhere, but you don't know what the state's going to do. I mean, granted, this year was different, but you didn't get certification till what, September, October of your numbers. So this whole thing is still a moving target. You don't know what the state's going to do. They've got a huge surplus right now.
Exactly.
And I don't know what they're gonna be doing. They got like $1 billion surplus. What they're gonna do with it. So again, it's a moving target.
So Mr. Chairman, Paul is absolutely right that I know that we had revisions between January and March when we do the open budget hearing. Many times, I think every single time we have revisions in the bulletin. So he's absolutely right that we don't know where the budget will stand until after we ask for the money.
Right.
So there's a lot of play in there, and there's a lot of uncertainty in what we do. But I think in our last budget subcommittee meeting, one of the things that we tried to nail down was trying to be better at predicting what those variations might be, and at least give everyone an understanding of where the envelope is, where those revisions will take place. I don't know if we're going to be successful with that, but we're going to try a lot better to get that done.
Right. Could I just ask Ms. Newman to talk to the Mendon side of the budget?
Our timeline is very similar to what Derek just said. Departments will start submitting their paperwork in October. I'll have my meetings with them to narrow down what their requests are through December. The board gets a basically balanced first pass budget that we review in January. The FinCom has a series of meetings between January and March, and we're done by St. Patrick's Day. We certify on St. Patrick's Day. So, but our budget doesn't substantially change from the beginning. I mean, our revenues are pretty constant. They have been for the last number of years. So we have a target of what we have on our side at all times. And so for the departments, basically, we're just managing whether or not they're allowed to submit requests for things or not. That's on the expenditure side, depending on where we are. Based upon the last 2 years, my guess is that we will be having them submit at level service budget, and anything else will have to be seriously examined.
Sounds about right. So we've kind of talked about the budget process for the school, for Mendon-Upton. And I think we haven't really got down to we want to set schedule monthly from now through December and then review that schedule and maybe meet a little more frequently once there's some more concrete information in front of us.
Well, could I submit that we just have so it's suggested by Paul and also reinforced by the information from Phil. We really are talking about a 3-meeting schedule unless we want to go more frequently than that. But I think the 3 meetings are pretty sufficient for getting a presentation from the school on the purpose and essentially how we're prioritizing expenditures. Understanding where the budget stands at the median point or preliminary budget understanding for the second meeting. And then the third meeting being that where we give the most recent numbers that we've got so that we can go into a budget certification meeting that preps us for the discussions on heading into the budget certification meeting the school has.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just back what John says. There is already a school budget subcommittee. Now, I'm having trouble here in the last little bit of discussions. Is this multi-board committee? Is that supposed to be like a shadow budget subcommittee? I'm not clear. I was on the impression that the budget committee does their due diligence. And again, as I pointed out earlier, so you can have 3 meetings with this multi-board committee because the budget subcommittee meeting is an ongoing process with, I don't know, Dr. Cohn, what are we talking? 6 or 7 different groups, maybe?
Go ahead.
Thanks. I would recommend considering using the budget subcommittee with representatives from each, as we have in the past for more. We have a schedule here of those frequent budget conversations that then can be reported back. I do think when we talked about the original goals here for this committee could be beyond just the school budget too. I think it does make sense to continue to have a couple meetings or a few meetings in the year of this board, because there's lots of other ways that we can look to collaborate with the school district and with the towns as well. In addition to, but all the presentations of our budget, certainly we can always bring it forward to this board, but we're already doing it at school committee and at the budget subcommittees too. So, but I think it's good to have a few of those, but maybe have a lot of the deeper work with the representatives as an approach.
As long as it's good with everyone, that sounds good. It's more of a check-in type of situation. Okay.
So following from that, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that we have a scheduled meetings similar to what Phil suggested. for the, you said, I forgot what you said.
I said
Mid-December.
No, I said mid-January, because we're gonna need, they're gonna have the budgets from individual departments consolidated by early December. The budget committee is going to need 1 or 2 cycles through December in order to validate and review, look at a strategy. Just, I mean, you're more than welcome to come to those meetings, and here you'll have your representatives, they're gonna get the documentation, they can bring it back. But I think it's gonna be an ongoing, fairly fluid conversation, and then in early January or mid-January, we'll have a picture of the expense side, to Steve, your point, and that will allow us to kind of come in, I think, a little more locked in to what the expenses look like without maybe the revenue component. And then, you know, in the past, we've had normally a joint meeting that's usually sometime in either the last or the next to last week in February. I would plan to do that, because then we'll have also the initial revenue side of the equation as well. What we think and what's there, you know, what's going to be that affects us all. If we do those 2 at least, then add to that, you know, we'll have our public hearing. And then, you know, that'll kind of be locked and loaded. And you guys will be, you know, you'll have all the information along the way. And, you know, you'll also have somebody in those budget committee meetings, so they'll be able to report back.
So I was mistaken, it's an additional 2 beyond this one.
Well, I'm just saying, those are the ones for the school budget piece. If there's some others that you think would be beneficial to have, by all means.
Well, and I think we can also, if we feel that those 2 aren't enough, we need to be together in the same room and have conversations, then we can always, you know, arrange for that as well.
When do the town revenue pictures come into focus for the following year?
It's likely around the same time as you're seeing numbers from the government.
So when you get the governor's budget, that's kind of the first pass, what town revenue numbers look like, and things like that. Is that similar? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's also based on tax classification, so that's happening in late November based on the tax rate being set. So it's happening between the end of November and early January. Yes. Derek?
Just 2 things. So to your last question, as the chairman pointed out, you know, we will see our revenue, we can predict our revenue numbers, you know, by 2.5% plus whatever our new growth is. And then we typically budget based upon the previous year's state budget. Hopes that it'll increase, and you know, typically we do see a very minimal increase year over year. And then, you know, our other revenue sources, basically local receipts. So we're able to look at our local receipts from the previous 3 years and predict or project what we think the following year is going to be. We always project conservatively, only because if we have a down year, we don't want to find ourselves come that fall having to move money around to make our budget whole again. So we'll always project conservatively on our revenue numbers. But to the conversation, I had a question regarding this group meeting in January, and talking about revenues and expenses on the school side. And if I'm hearing you correctly, if that doesn't take place until mid to late January, then I don't see any way for at least the town of Upton to submit a balanced budget to both the Board of Selectmen and FinCom until the school side can be certain as to what their revenues and expenses are going to be for that year. So if I'm hearing you correctly, Phil, then we won't be able to do anything until you have your first meeting, if not your second meeting. Thank you.
Well, so I think, so here's what I would say to that. I think you're hearing me right. I was just reacting in terms of having a January meeting to what Steve was saying about wanting to see the, you know, initial projections for expenses ahead of time, because we can take a look at those and talk about our budget priorities. We could talk about, you know, what's influencing at least our expense side of the equation. We'll have, I would say, some general guesstimates for what the revenue is, but, you know, who knows, you know, we can't commit to that because the governor's budget doesn't get released until January 26th. So that's kind of when the revenue side of the picture at least gives us a better shaping up in terms of what it will actually look like. But we know, for example, we're going to get $30 a student, those are generally the approaches. So barring any major swings, we can give you a general guesstimate, maybe I'd say a 95 to 98% confidence interval.
Maureen, would you like to go through the schedule that you presented, or?
Sure, just wanted to share that with you. It's honestly more of an internal document, but happy to share it with all of you about some of the process. And it's a working document too, so we may add in meetings or different presentations in there. But as we are starting the process, I've already given members of our leadership team their departmental forms for submitting their requests. And starting next week, I'm starting individual meetings with them around priorities. And then we're coming together as a team to bring those priorities together. And then through that, we'll start to have these departmental presentations to the school committee. And in between, you can see we have the budget subcommittee dates that we've established for the year. And there we'll work through the other details. So it just gives you a sense of all the layers that go into our end in building the process and the timeline we've set for right now to start the year, which is a good month or so in advance of what we've done before.
So on January 10th next year, there's an item, Whitlock High School budget presentation. Is that the initial budget presentation that's being done?
So that is, we broke it up with the different schools to give their summaries. We'll already have all of that together, but we're trying not to have them all present in one night because that would be a lot. So they'll be able to dive a little bit deeper so that our goal is to make sure the community fully understands what goes into the budget, what our needs are, what investments are, what are the regulations, what we've done in the past. So we have a set template we'll be using this year that will hopefully clarify our budget a little bit more than we have in the past.
Any questions?
Just a quick follow-up, kind of a comment / question. There's something also that I hear from residents in town, and I think that's something as a committee, as a district, that we really should be doing a better job of, which is standardizing what that budget looks like. So that if we look back to 2018 school budget, and we look to the projected 23 school budget, those numbers, whether it be the revenue side, whether it be, say, capital, we have that spreadsheet that will show different composition of the budget. But we should really look to standardize some of that information so that we can look backwards from year to year. It's fluid, and it looks, again, for comparison's sake, if people can better understand what goes into the budget. And I think whether it be the actual communication that we put forward to the residents, but again, I think that the numbers side of it, whether it be insurance, labor, whatever those numbers look like, we should really do a good job of trying to standardize that year over year.
So can I ask a question, Stephen, what you're talking about? So I do know that I think it was about 2016, we had an updated chart of accounts. The state implemented, and we implemented that. We had some minor tweaks here or there. But I think for all intents and purposes, correct me if I'm wrong, don't we publish the last 5 years during our budget presentation of that data?
Yes.
At a line item level?
Yep.
Okay. But is that what you're talking about?
If you look at the municipal side, for instance, I don't get it every year, but I could look at Mendon's budget. And that composition and the way that's presented to the taxpayer, line by line, right? There may be 300 lines in the budget, and in Upton we probably have maybe a little more than 300 lines. But we changed it a few years ago, but prior to that, you could look back, it didn't matter how many years you look back, you could see what those numbers were. Say you went back, we may show 3 years, you may show 5 years, but the budget should look the same for 10 years. Similar to what it does in the municipal budget. When you look at our municipal budget, right, the subcategories are always numbered the same way. Education is always, for us, I think it's line 300. Whereas DPW is always the same line every year. police, fire, EMS, it doesn't matter, they're the same line every year. So people can look at that and see that.
So I do know we at least have that for the last 5 years since I think, correct me if I'm wrong, what, 2016?
Well, last year's budget was FY '22, so we would have had 21, 20, 19, 18, probably back to 17.
Okay.
All lined up like that. So when the chart of accounts was changed, I had to say, okay, well, in FY '17, it was in this account, but now it has to be in this account. But I consolidated all that to make it all line up correctly. So we do have a 5-year window. We don't have a 15 or 20-year window, but we have a 5-year window. Now it'll be 6. If we want to keep stretching it out. But like when you see a printed report, like say just the proposed budget or a year-to-date expenditure, the software only produces like 1 year. You can make it produce 4 or 5 years, but it's hard when the account function codes had changed. It's hard for the software to comprehend all that.
Okay.
But yeah, we do have a 5-year window though, which we had like in the budget book that was put out last year at the hearing. It had 5 previous years.
So I could look at our workman's comp expense, for example, and I could look at the last 5 years and I could see what it was each individual year. And adjustments are changed that it's year to year to year to year to year. So,
But
if that's what you're talking about. I just want to make sure because I think as we go through presenting this material, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I remember what material was there when I first came on board from a public perspective and what's there now. I know there's a lot there, but I also want to make sure we're not overwhelmed.
Right. Right. I just happen to be one of those people that likes a lot of information. So if the budget had an opportunity to be 10 pages long or 3 pages long, me personally, I like to see the 10 pages.
Listen,
Now, I'm not saying that that's
Yeah.
correct, and I'm not saying that's in the best interest of all. Again, if you can tell me that you can look at workman's comp, or I can look at workman's comp looking back 5 years, that's great.
Yeah.
I just don't know if it's available to everybody. Is that
I
available
believe it's
just
right on
to
the
the school?
website. Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure it's all.
Steve, I'm not sure where we're going with this, but the budget's presented, it has town funded operating expense and capital expense and there's like 3 lines, all right? If you're looking for the, you want to know how much they appropriated for OPEB, or you want to know how much they spent for health, and you want to know how much, that material is available, but it's like 10 or 12 or 20 pages at single space. It's there and it goes back quite a few years. And there's no way you're gonna put line by line school budget in the town's operating.
You're
budget presentation.
totally mixing 2 things.
Well,
I don't even want to
address.
address that. We're talking about the school. We're not talking about what the town does.
So,
No.
but I understand, I think what you're saying. So if I go on the website today and I look there, I can go to FY19 line item budget, FY20 line item budget, FY21. And that's the point of what I think Paul's talking about, which is that, that line item budget is like 20 pages long. So if I look at FY22 line item budget, it also includes the historical amounts from FY17 through FY21. So you can see all of that comparison data at a line item level. So it's all there. There's roll-up amounts when you look at the summary handout. It kind of breaks down each school. It breaks down each kind of major department area. It breaks all those things down. There's an open budget hearing that talks about the drivers. All that stuff is there. So it's all available on the website. I think the school and the administration has done a tremendous job, specifically Jay, Maureen, the team, of making sure that information is available out there consistently. So if there's something that people don't see or something that people want, by all means, they should let us know, and then we can figure out, how do we get it in a way that doesn't confuse them. But our goal is to make sure we have more information out there, not less. It's always been there for a while.
Okay, and you're saying it's in the same format year after year? Early
Yeah,
since 2016?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Okay. So any further comments on budget process?
Can I, my friend Mr. Nicholson over there has put his budget subcommittee chairman's hat on. The big word is always transparency. Again, I'm not a big fan of the camera, but Would it be worthwhile to see if this gentleman has any more spare time and to give a little more transparency to the process, to publicize these budget committee meetings?
I mean, more widely than just the announcement that comes out from school today. Be more.
Yeah, that, only the people that are at the committee meeting, a part of the committee, no.
Yeah. No, I.
Because there is information that's presented by whoever it is, whether it's the high school principal or the Clough principal or the director of IT. There's information that is presented at this budget hearing that people should know about.
Yeah, I think.
Now, what do they want to look at? What do they want to see the recording or why not? That's another story. But giving it the opportunity to see it.
So we put a lot of effort into presenting our budget information in 2019. And of course, the COVID came in place and just blew everything out of the water that we had done. But we, as Paul is saying, we covered very specific areas of the budget. I think that's exactly what Maureen has planned for this year as well. And we're trying to make that information more public by conferring it during school committee meetings. So a lot of those presentations will take place in the school committee meetings directly. So the budget subcommittee won't be the forum for that as it was in 2019.
All right.
But I do think, to your point, Paul, I do think it's very important for us to publicize that we have budget information coming out at this school committee meeting and make sure everybody in the town knows it, not just the parents for school committee meetings and not just, obviously the attendees of the meeting. So I agree with you. We can probably do a good job or a better job at publicizing the meeting from when they take place for the budget information.
So you do not, in the past, that meeting is not broadcast via Zoom.
The
That's
budget
correct.
subcommittee.
It was never broadcast via Zoom.
So
But that was in a day and age when,
right.
I don't think anyone knew what Zoom was back then.
Right.
I mean, we're only talking about 2019, but.
So going forward, I think Paul is asking, going forward, can budget subcommittee meetings be Zoom hybrid meetings?
If its purpose is to project the information of the budget and the objectives for each budget area, those are going to take place during the school committee meetings. So those are projected out. I don't have a problem with making the budget committee meetings Zoom, but I'm just questioning the purpose for having that.
Oh, it's a public meeting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone can come to the meeting.
Anyone can come to the meeting.
It's posted.
And so in turn, in the sense of, as Paul mentioned, transparency, I know in Mendon, where our push is to make every meeting that's a public meeting a hybrid option, because the public deserves to be able to access every public meeting. And so there are people who aren't able to come in person and experience some of these meetings. And this system now has really been beneficial for access for folks who are not physically able to make it. So I think it would be great if any public meeting the school is doing would be hybrid and allow people to at least tune into this.
Well, your point's well taken. If I could, I'd just like to converse with some people after the meeting, but I'm sure we can accommodate that.
We did that last year. We did have hybrid meetings.
We were all,
Yeah.
no, we did it.
In many cases, for the 2019 meetings that we had, you're looking at one of the only people that ever showed up for any of those meetings. So that goes to your point that a lot more people would attend and consume the information.
And yeah, and it may help with the longer term conversation that, at least people in the community can listen in and kind of have that background information as we get to the point where you're at a school committee meeting. And maybe some of those questions that they're going to be asking the school committee as a whole will already have been answered if they were able to.
I mean, how do we conduct policy subcommittee meetings today?
They're even our in-person meetings generally still have a Zoom link. And I know we did for budget last year, because I remember having people on screen when we were in the superintendent's conference room.
So I don't have a problem with it, it's just fitting with this.
Oh, you all set?
Yeah, no, again, I come back to that a couple of years ago, when there was a lot of information presented at that, when either Janice Gallagher or Joe Lakeview, whenever they came in and they made these presentations to the budget. There was a lot of information. If you're telling me that same presentation that Janice Gallagher, Joe Lakeview, whoever it is, if they're gonna make to the budget subcommittee, that's gonna be presented at a subsequent school committee meeting, just do it once. Let this guy stay home one night.
Well, that's what we're doing. I think that's the point. I think it's that. we had
Yeah, if you said
Yeah.
that, you know, that's gonna be at the committee, I'm fine. Let's keep the budget committee, subcommittee like they have been.
Understood.
Okay. I think we've gotten through all of that conversation. There's one item that I asked to be put on this agenda, which talks about the idea of a financial management study, which I've heard a lot about over my years as select board member from community members around distrust with both town and school government and how we spend money, right? And that's, I think, not something we are only experiencing in Mendon-Upton, but it's something across the board in terms of government and trust that people have in government. And so as we're going into this next fiscal year, we thought it would be a good idea to discuss the potential to have a third-party financial management study done on all three of our entities to build the trust in the community, and to show them that we are all stewards of their finances, and, you know, allow us to defend ourselves in showing that. And so I wanted to bring that to the group to see if there was any appetite for that conversation to progress and get people's thoughts.
So, Mr. Chairman, so am I correct in understanding that the town of Mendon is doing this right now?
We are in the progress of those conversations, yes. But I think it would be good for all of us to do it. And so that we're all on the same page, we're all showing that to the residents of both communities and building trust with them.
So can I ask, how are you doing?
Right now, we've had we've had one discussion with two avenues. One avenue is to hire a company to come in and do the study. And personally, my thought was that would be the avenue we would go with if we could get the school department and Upton to agree to do this. If those two entities weren't interested, we've kind of already talked to DOR about doing a study through them.
You mean through like the Department of Local Services?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And the purpose of the study is to do what? I mean, so we have an audit, we have an accounting firm that audits us every year. They go through,
They're just
do the right
making sure you have
financial management.
law and all that, right? This is a little more deep dive into how you're spending your money, and showing that your financial practices are sound. And so the study at the end would provide recommendations and outline what you're doing right and what you could make improvements on.
With all due respect, you're dealing with three autonomous municipalities here.
I
Town of Upton,
understand that.
Town of Mendon, and the Mendon-Upton Regional School District.
Right.
Now, one minute you're gonna say we don't wanna spend any money, but this is gonna, the way you're talking, this is gonna cost a lot of money.
Right.
All right, do you not, this is a rhetorical question, do you not have faith in the way that town of Mendon operates? I'm just, you don't have to answer that.
No, I'm going
just
to
making
answer,
that a
and I'm
rhetorical
going to tell
question.
you that I have complete faith in the way we operate, and I have faith in the way that the Mendon-Upton School District operates, and I have faith in the way that the town of Upton operates. However, people in all three that are constituents of all three of those organizations do not have, not all of them, but there are many who do not have faith in those three organizations and the way they operate their finances. And so if we ever want to break that cycle of hearing the same thing every time we talk about an override, then we need to take some action and spend a little money to be able to produce a study from a third party that says the town of Mendon-Upton and the school department are doing a great job, and this is what we found, and it's all good. That's my point.
And how is this proposed to be a joint effort? So the town of Upton's gonna have to appropriate money, the town of Mendon's gonna have to appropriate money, and the MURSD is gonna have to appropriate money?
Yes, that's my proposal, because I think we're going to do it together. We all agree on what the firm is going to be, and then we decide as a group that that's the organization we want, and we all pay for a portion.
What would that kind,
If I may. A few years back, Upton, I don't recall who we used for, I cannot remember who we used for a consultant, but we had a financial policies and procedures manual done. I always find with studies, no matter what, I always say I have a file cabinet full of documents, absolutely full of documents. And there are different studies that have been done for different reasons, whether it's emergency preparedness, or, you know, again, this is a financial policies and procedures manual. And I always find that these studies always start with information you already know. You provide, they'll ask everybody, what you know, how do you do this, how do you take care of it, how do you build your budget, how do you build it. It's a lot of information that you end up providing to the consultant. And then the consultant takes that information and really, builds you a nice airtight document. I feel like we have probably 75% of what you're suggesting in our policies and procedures manual, and I would say that was probably completed 5 years ago. I think I was just finishing on FinCom and just getting elected on to BOS, so I would say it was
5, 6, 7, somewhere in there.
yeah, somewhere in that time period. So I think we have that document, or at least, again, probably 75% of what you are seeking. I understand what you're saying. I think it's a good idea, but again, only my opinion from the board. I think we already have that, or we have enough of that where it wouldn't. Again, it shouldn't be a secret to anybody, whether it's on camera or anybody in the room. I don't like spending money, and I really feel government's big. We're overwhelmed with government, we're overwhelmed with studies. So I don't want to put another 10,000 or 20,000 on my residents that I don't have to spend. So, my opinion, again, when we have that document, I wouldn't want to spend that money.
And just so you know, that is on our Board of Selectmen's webpage, the procedure, policy and procedures manual that was done. Doesn't have a date on it, but it's not.
I can tell you, I'm not going to go read it. I promise you that. But,
That's what it about when I
That's what Upton does.
right.
You don't want to know what you want to do with Mendon, yes, I understand.
Right. And I trust that I'm not the one with the issue. That I'm bringing this up because I do feel that all of the overrides I've been through, I hear the same message from voters who are now, is they feel like it's misappropriation of funds and mismanaged monies. And if we're going to dispel that, we need to show that we're doing something to provide those voters with a third party answer. That's my only point.
So if I can just interject, what Steve saying Upton did a few years ago That's exactly what Mendon is in the process of doing right now, pending final approval from our board. Department of Revenue, Department of Local Services has agreed to do exactly what we talked about. And it should be started in the February timeframe and done in a couple of months. So when we're all done, what we're going to have is just what you talked about, a document based on what we do, recommendations and plans with best practices, policies and procedures, something that when townspeople ask, we can say, this is how we do it, this is why we do it, here's the record history. We have the same history of budget that Paul talked about. The question is, does the school have an analogous to that? Do you have that, or would you be willing to reach out to the DOR to have them do the same thing with you?
So I'd be surprised if DOR would do school.
See, that
And if not, Bessie, or, well, do you have
The
something?
the DLS does school audits.
Oh, okay.
They do school financial
Well, it's not
audits.
just, again, this isn't just an audit. This isn't, an audit is, what did you do? This is, how do you do it on a regular basis? And they would make recommendations about, this is how you do it, this is how you should do it, and here's the rules and regulations, and also it standardizes everything. And I think that's a big key to it, because that was just a conversation. Where do I go to look at, to answer these questions? And when somebody asks a question, well, why are you spending all this money, or how do you do this? What's the process? Well, we've already got those policies and procedures and everything in place.
So we have, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but we do have, and we updated back in the day of Vicky, I think, in version 1, and Lee Martin, or whatever, we had actually contracted at the state level to revise our whole policy piece to make sure it was instituted with appropriate best practices. Okay.
And who did that?
I believe MASC did it. Or no, it was MASC. I go back and look to see who did it, but that was it was in a while ago, to make it consistent, to make it standard, to make all those kinds of things. I know too that, we break each piece down because there are best practices that are consistently and continuously evolving. Okay, so if you look at, I'll say athletics, maybe that's not the best example. If you look at, I guess, I could say, student services. The reality is that student services and services we have to provide, we get different mandates every year, they get involved, they get new, there are best practices in terms of how to fund it or not fund it. In the case we just say, well, good luck. I'm happy. That's partially why we put all the financial and budgetary documentation. It's out there. So if somebody has a question like, well, what was this last year? Why are you spending money here? What's there? We're pretty much an open book to that. And don't get me wrong, I would be the first person that would jump on saying, we need somebody to come in and, and validate that if I thought it was going to clarify and, I'll say basically, change the opinion of somebody. The opinion might not already be formed. But the point being is that I guess all the stuff is there. Jay and Maureen, I don't know what you think in that regard in terms of, because we're constantly working through superintendent committee, working it through, the business managers committee, MASC, all those kinds of things to make sure that we're implementing those pieces.
And the state has a lot of requirements on us, so we're constantly answering to them. But the thing that I find very attractive about the suggestion that you have is making sure that we fit the standards to the rest of the state. And they can, who knows whether we have strayed from the last time we did some sort of policies and procedures study.
I can, if I can, I don't know.
Yeah, Maureen, go ahead.
I have a thought. I love the idea of doing reviews of all of our different programs. I love that piece. And one thing I'll say about just where we're at right now, right now as part of my role entering into this role this year, I'm doing an entry plan, and a piece of that is I'm uncovering things that are going on in different departments. And not that anything is wrong, right? But what that process is, I'm asking questions, I'm looking at it through a new lens, so I can give lots of examples. Some of the other departments where, we're doing a different budget process this year, that I'm listening, we're making changes. So one piece that I like about what you're saying, not necessarily that exact study of what you're saying right now, is as we get towards the end of this year, I'm going to have more information too, just broadly. And what I'd love to have is do kind of a rotation, what we do in our student support services, where a piece of that department each year, we're going to study this piece and then we make changes. We're going to study this piece the next year and make changes. To do a full comprehensive review right now really doesn't, in my opinion, make sense for where we're at with everything that's going on. However, I love that piece and that idea. So like for tomorrow, I'm part of a school finance law course in the morning that we'll be attending. And they're going to give us updates related to that. And then that'll be part of this review of, okay, I'll ask Jay questions. Are we doing these pieces? What do we need to do? So we'll make those minor tweaks. But then the outside review, absolutely. I love that piece. So just wanted to validate that.
Okay.
The other thing to what Mike was speaking with, I can't remember how long ago it was, but there was a time, probably 10 years ago, where the Department of Ed did come in and look at all of our policies and procedures. And, I remember specifically one discussion about how, municipalities should never have credit cards. It's the worst thing in the world. So they did do that, but it was a long time ago. I could find out if that's something that they would update,
Well, that would be
is it a recurring thing? They implied to me that they were coming like every 3 or 4 years. I haven't seen them since.
But Chair, the recurring theme that, Mr. Flaherty brought up and Sean and Bill, everybody is, the idea of transparency, right? And now we're in a new age with Zoom and Teams and YouTube. And the reality is that everybody is getting an education and they're seeing, they're seeing how things are done. And there's a lot that people just don't know. And when people don't know, they begin to think that somebody's trying to hide something. But it's really not that. It's just how are we able to get it out to people to see? And the way it was explained to me when I started asking around about this was that we're in a sweet spot right now, is the term where we've been in COVID, we're coming out of that now. We're now using Teams and Zoom. And it's a time that people are paying attention. Everybody's looking every time that there's an override and people have questions, and that book seems to go in a cycle. And a lot of people are paying attention right now. So it was a sweet spot where I reached out to DOR on behalf of my board. And they've come back and, like I said, pending a vote, which is really a formality, but free, they're going to review our financial team from top to bottom, look at the policies and procedures we have in place, rewrite them, make suggestions, put rules and regulations in place. But that process is going to happen, publicly, so that it'll be available. It'll be on the website, much as what you're telling me that you already have, that Upton did a few years ago. And it would be great if we can get the school to revisit if you've done it before. Mendon had it done before too, I found out. It's 20 years ago. I have the documents, but it's time to refresh it.
Right, and we haven't received a presentation from DLS yet.
Right, that's right.
I think that's, we need to really see how in-depth they go, because
I agree.
for me, if it's not in-depth enough, I would propose Mendon does this on our own and hires someone to do more in-depth. But yeah, that's definitely on our next
But we're in
agenda.
the process.
Mr. Chair, what do you think about Maureen's suggestion that we do this? Because we do have essentially completely different practices for special education versus things like athletics. I mean, it's very broad in how we have to act. So what do you think about her suggestion and being able to split this up into a multi-year process?
Well, I think that it's really something that the school committee would want, right? And for all of us to be reviewing, even in Mendon, we want to look back at how we do things. The old, oh, this is just how we've done things for 50 years. Well, it doesn't mean it's the right way to do it. Things change and you need to be open to change. And that sounds like, your administration is focusing in on that, which is good. So, yeah.
Well, and it also might provide a different lens for reporting some of that work that's already happening. For example, you just completed a special education audit.
Right.
And part of that was to look at how we were spending our resources within that department. And that was just reported on in our last school committee meeting. So some of those pieces are happening, but having that kind of a lens when you're reporting out to the public
Right.
and connecting it directly to the budget.
Right.
And which I think might be a helpful reframe for some of the things that we're already doing.
And even just the availability of those types of documents, right? I mean, we all have audits done, and we always say that, well, we have an audit done every year. Well, it's a paper book that you gotta ask for. It's not on the website. It's, I don't know if the school's audit is or not, but making it more available would be an important step.
Mr. Kevin, might I suggest that this might be a topic to put on the next multi-board meeting, whenever that is.
Sure.
Let's assume that by the next multi-board meeting, you, i.e. the town of Mendon, who have done their due diligence and have looked in further, or maybe even come up with an agreement with Division of Local Services, and then bring it back to the rest of the board, because I think as was alluded to over here, DESI has rules as to how the operation is supposed to be run. And I think they look pretty closely at it. So one more thing that I'd like to say is, you say there's mistrust out there. Well, I hear it, Steve hears it, Kelly hears it, people on the screen hear it. As part of the process, I think it behooves everyone in this room who is part of the process to try to correct the misstatements and misinformation that's out there.
Right.
And to not to do so is, basically shirking your responsibility.
Well, truly, I mean, I don't know how many times I've been on the phone over this past budget process with people individually. I see comments on Facebook, and I've always stayed away from Facebook until this year. I thought, you know what? Not running again, and I'm gonna call individuals out and I'm gonna have conversations on the phone with them. And I did, and at the end of the conversation, it's usually a different opinion, and that's good, right? But there's many people who will not pick up the phone and talk to you on the phone. They'll only say things in public or behind the computer. So it is hard, but I know for me, I always try to dispel that misinformation when I can.
It's not an easy task, I can assure you.
Right?
Yeah, Mark, I guess, so DLS is the independent contractor or the consultant that you guys have reached out with?
They're a state agency, so they would do it with their in-house team, right?
Right. The way it was explained to me is, this is the Division of Local Services, the Department of Revenue.
Okay.
And who we interface with, it's a municipality all the time. And they would have a team of at least 3 that would come in and look at all of our policies and practices. Essentially what Jay just said, that, they were gonna do every few years, we haven't seen them in 10 years. What they're gonna do is what they're proposing, and this is again, just anecdotally talking to me.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have them in the presentation of exactly what they're gonna do.
Got it. So was there two paths, or did I misunderstand it? Did I understand, like, first you were gonna look at one path with a consultant, that you could potentially get 3 in the umbrella, and then the DLS under DOR is a separate path? Or
I'm
are they one of the same?
just talking about what we're doing separate from this, this
See,
organization.
this is where we're not on the same page.
Right,
But
right.
my
I'm in favor, I'm just saying that my piece of it, just to reach out.
Yeah, okay, no, I was a little confused.
There were,
with Mark's
I did
initial
mention
comment.
two paths. One was, in my mind, if the three entities agreed, we would all go and find a third party vendor to do the study. If we couldn't get another partner on that, I think it was likely that we would go with the DLS option that was free.
Yeah.
But yet we still have yet to see the presentation from DLS to see what they're gonna do. So some
Mr. Chairman, if I may, if you go to the DLS webpage, you can find all the recent evaluations, financial management reviews that they have done in the past few years.
How I start.
Yeah.
Looking at ones that they did for other communities, similar things.
Okay.
Original services, just type in financial management review.
And actually, even DLS, you can look up school reimbursements. So there's a lot of information on DLS. You can look up what Mendon-Upton Regional got this past year. It's 12,780 and what it was 5 years ago. You can change the years.
But they're gonna only come in and look at your financial management processes.
Yeah, I mean.
They're not coming in to audit, like, they're not gonna be able to say, so in electricity, you spend $100,000, that's a good one.
Well, that's, guess where I was
They're not
going.
really saying.
Let's go a little bit, Phil. It's like, you know, there's maybe two comments here. One is when you bring these kind of reviews in, and you get a stamp, you can build trust by having the independent party, right? It just sort of, it takes you out of the mode of defense, right? We're not going to defend yourself, say, listen, we brought it in, we've got 10-step process. We had 8 of them down, 2 of them we were off, they gave us some education. We're now in line with best, industry best practices, municipality best practices, whatever. I mean, there's definitely some value to that, and you can see it because it gives you something to stand up. And then I think thirdly, and this is maybe where, or secondly, Sean, or some of the conversations we've had is, I would love to see the consultants or to be able to hire, people to help us on the other side where it says, okay, what are the 25 schools that look like you? What are the 25 towns that look like you? So Mendon has 47 miles of road. So we should be putting, $40,000 a year into asphalt versus, it's like, how do you start to get those key performance indicators that you have commonalities and all of a sudden something's going to stand out. It's like, holy crap, the school spends $200,000 a year on electricity. That's 50% more than most schools with the same square footage we have. Those are the things that I would love to see, but I think you were probably going down a different path of more of a process review than necessarily like a KPI financial comparison.
I mean, the first step is.
Yeah.
And then you want to compare apples and apples. Right. And see how we compare the others. But that's not an easy task. You can compare apples to apples because every community has different makeup. Which is part of the argument we made to the legislature over and over again about the funding formula. Right.
That opens up a whole can.
That's right.
There's also, if I may, there's also another website. It's ClearGov, and ClearGov used to have the opportunity where you could plug in, again, if you wanted to look at Mendon and say, okay, what are like communities to Mendon? I've looked at it a few times. I wasn't really, I think Upton had subscribed to it maybe 5 years ago where we were somehow had paid some sort of membership fee to get into ClearGov. There's some useful information on there. I don't know if between that and DLS, you may be able to get some answers that you may be seeking. But it's another website.
Sure.
Again, it's a municipal exchange of information. You may be able to get some info on there.
Steve, just historically, how we did that for a couple of years and it was decided we weren't getting the bang for our buck. But we just, that's a moneymaker for somebody out there.
Yeah, I remember looking at that. It's not the best platform and doesn't really give you everything.
And it's somewhat pricey. I think you're right. It was somewhat pricey to be a member.
In terms of schools, you think towns are complex to compare because it's a different, you don't want to compare localities with regionals because it's just completely apples and oranges. And the towns actually categorize a lot of their expenditure depending on how affluent they are as well. So you'll get, like athletic complexes built by Hopkinton that are not anywhere near, they don't even show up on the school budget. So it's just a completely different landscape when you're talking about budgeting schools.
And it's very, because you don't always know the revenue side for particular towns. I think I'll always look at, say, Blackstone Millville. You said, okay, well, how does Blackstone Millville compare with Upton? Well, Blackstone's a big town. It's actually bigger than Upton. And Millville's very, very small. Blackstone, I think, has a power plant where they have one particular taxpayer that pays $1 million in rent.
Please don't rub that in.
So, you know, a lot of times you just can't compare it. It's very difficult.
Okay, I think we've probably beaten that topic, so.
Agree.
That's our last item here. I know we've, yes, Jeff.
There was something on here about identifying FinCom members to be part of
Oh,
the
yes.
subcommittee, and that has really fallen through the cracks over the last few years.
Right, what I was gonna say to that is that, on the Mendon side, we can get with the finance committee to get a member to commit to that.
We had already started that process, and someone was supposed to be here tonight. I don't know if he's still wandering around trying to figure out where he's supposed to be. Or something happened, or.
It'd be good to get them on board.
Yes, they are.
So they know where.
Yeah, but they are on board. And we are in the process.
Upton has obviously had an active member on the subcommittee, so.
Mark, I just make two quick questions.
Yes,
I guess, do we need to physically pick dates or we can do that by email after the fact?
we can probably do email,
Okay.
if that makes sense for everyone.
And then I think someone else made the other comment, but maybe the next time we do get together, if you guys could share what you found from DLS and maybe, Jay, you can share, reaching back out to what we did 10 years ago
Find out if
with
it's-
MASC or CS or DESE, and let's kind of compare notes there and see if those are valuable options.
Definitely. Okay,
Do we have a date for the next meeting?
no, we're gonna shoot an email around and try and find the next one.
And therefore, we have no more business, Mr. Chairman, I move we adjourn the meeting.
Moved and seconded, all in favor, roll call.
All party, aye.
Stephen Mattelli and I.
Mark Grill, aye.
Mike Morale, aye.
Bill Desotter, aye.
Nicholson, aye.
Eric Brown, aye.
Carrie Lawrence, aye.
Vicky Ludwigson, aye.
Maureen Dwight, aye.
Tenio, aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank